We are now live.
Okay, welcome. This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. It is Friday afternoon, March 17th, St. Patty's Day. We're going to work for a little bit, get some loose ends tied up for the week, so when we come back next week, we'll be fresh for the capital budget. The thing I wanted to work with the committee, and I know we don't have legislative counsel with us right now, but at least I want to spend some time with the committee really working through the language of what was called the cash fund. And we are renaming that the Capital Infrastructure Reserve Fund. There were paper copies of this yesterday. Up there, there's two sheets. One is bigger print. The bigger print is the language as it exists now.
Excuse me, it's not on the website?
It's
It
on
is.
the web.
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yes. No,
Yesterday?
not on the- not on
Yesterday.
the email, it's on-
Yesterday's.
Yes.
So
Under Becky Wasserman, it's the second one.
Wait a minute, go back up. I'll find it.
go to today's and it's back into it.
So this again is a reminder, the parameters of that fund were put in place by Appropriations Committee of Conference. None of the folks on the Appropriations Conference Committee had ever served dealing with the capital bill. So it comes from an appropriation view, which is a little different than a capital construction view. So I really want us to figure out what can this reserve fund be used for in the capital budget. One thing that Becky has really wanted to connect the process right now the fund is there. And it says the purpose is for using general funds to defray the cost of future capital expenditures that would otherwise be paid for using the state's general obligations line report. And the fund could be used for costs associated with a proposed capital budget that occurs prior to the construction phase, which would include feasibility, planning, design, and engineering and architectural costs. Projects with an anticipated lifespan of less than 20 years.
Are you on the old bill or the new bill?
I'm saying what it is now.
Yeah, okay.
I'm looking at the change.
Okay.
version.
I just want to let you know what it is now before we start talking, how do we change it? So the projects with anticipated lifespans of less than 20 years. And it could be for costs associated if we redeem some of our obligations, general obligation bonds. And then they have a catch-all, number 4, other eligible capital projects receiving an appropriation from the general fund. So that could be anything. That could be something from AOT. That could be anything beyond the capital bill. So when we kept hearing in testimony that when we saw a line item on our spreadsheet, and we saw a line item that it was for, and we kept hearing, this is for planning, schematic design documents, not for construction. It's not for site acquisition. But lo and behold, as we started going through some of the items for the cash fund, particularly in FY25, we're going to be used for site acquisition, or we're going to be used for construction. So we need to clarify what this reserve fund is really going to be used for. And that's what I'd like us to see if we can figure that out today. And the other thing, in this new language that Becky drafted, she wants a real nexus between this reserve fund and the capital bill and the debt affordability committee of sorts. She just doesn't want this fund to be hanging out there that people think it's a sugar bowl.
Mhm.
Because that's been the concern from the get-go, that this could be a little sugar bowl. Sure.
Do you have a brief history or rationalization of why it's limited to planning and design and not construction?
It started last year, and the treasurer state treasurer at the time really wanted to set up a system for pay-go, where you pay as you go. And to start that system, you start small
Okay.
and you just start with planning. That was the thinking. And also engineering and architectural costs sometimes are general fund. Okay. Engineering and architectural costs sometimes traditionally would be an appropriations committee for the BGS piece. And then over time, we picked that up because the argument was, well, those architectural and engineering costs were associated with those projects that you're bonding for. And we kept saying, well, it's really putting pressure on the capital bill, but we picked it up because the general fund was in real dire need of being released of something. So we offered to pick it up. We've now moved that back to the general fund. So the thinking is that the cash reserve fund could also be used to pay for those architectural and engineering loans. So Eric.
I had Eric Kilcorn, BGS. I had one more sort of origin story piece, and that is the idea that sometimes planning money goes into projects that don't actually happen. And the idea that if you want to pay interest on something for 20 years, it would be nice if it was something you actually had. And so as sort of an incremental move to turn the oil tanker around to the idea of pay-go, starting with the less tangible parts of the process seemed like a good first bite.
So that's what I'd like to kind of see if we can get our head wrapped. Do people know where Gina and Mary are?
Mary will be here, she's.
Gina's I call now.
Gina was in the piano room.
Right.
Yeah, question on, so what has, obviously in the past has been project planning that has started for projects that been before. And what happened? Did that, was that money bonded?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bonded for something that didn't exist?
But we didn't know it wasn't going to exist
Right.
until they got through the planning process. I mean, this happens in this world all the time under our bill. We do this. We buy buildings sometimes with great anticipation. We're gonna move this, this, and this into the building, and we keep the building for 5 years and we put it up for sale.
Or one administration designs a project and the next administration comes in and says, that's a Taj Mahal, we're not doing that. But then you're $1 million or $2 million into it.
Okay, well, it would be kind of nice not to have bonded money that we're paying interest on projects that don't exist.
But we don't know that until you get further along into your design documents.
Right.
I mean, we did
Yeah.
this, I mean, for the archives, an archive, the archives was up at Redstone, the Secretary of State's office, and they had to get moved. So the first thinking was they could move someplace in the Capitol complex, so some people didn't like that. So then the other thought was put them up in Middlesex, but some people didn't like that because that was too far away. So then we thought, well, what about the space near 89 where the exit and entrance ramp? There was some property in there. Took us 4 years. And we kept putting money to try and figure these out. And then we came back full circle and built it in Middlesex. We did the same thing with the forensic lab. We had to replace the forensic lab that was at the Waterbury complex. And we spent, I think, 3 years trying to find property, having different options for the forensic lab in different places, because we didn't want to keep it where it was, because it's floodplain, blah, blah, blah. We came back and kept it where it was. So you've got to expend money to know where you're gonna go.
So I understand that well, that's not,
Shouldn't be.
but I see two things here. One, how much money that do we have bonded capacity that exists for the last 20 years that are any of these cases that we're paying interest on those?
Who knows? I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's exorbitant.
It might- it might-
Larry
Curly and Mower back. No.
This is trouble.
Love Curly.
It might not be absorbent, just as a thought.
Yeah, you want it.
We could have the capacity to clear those off the books. Yeah, you could buy out those farms.
You probably can't
I
separate.
don't think it's the That's the world of the state treasurer. They don't go out with specific bonds or planning dollars.
Okay, so then back in the process again, where we got bonded money and we got a project that's moved forward and has stopped, they've expended some bonded money. Is there an opportunity at any point along that line? You have to do it a priori or a posteriori. Could you use this money to,
That's the reallocation process.
so we
If
could,
it hasn't been expended,
so you could reallocate at a certain
if
point?
it hasn't been expended, that's what our repro group is. Because we got 14 million, as an example, we've given the bonding authority, we've given authority to go bond $14 million for a particular building. We've said that building, with the use of that building now with our state employees is not appropriate for our state employees. So we're saying, instead of tying up that 14 million bonding capacity, we're gonna reallocate.
Yeah, so you see where I'm headed, and then when projects are coming down the pike, some projects are obvious that they're not likely to stop and have this problem where the project's not gonna proceed. I would think that many of your projects are gonna be of a scale or of a known quantity where that's not gonna be an issue. And if that's not gonna be an issue, then we shouldn't have to worry about spending bonded money on that. But in some of these larger projects where there's a lot of miscellaneous things, maybe we should prioritize the use of this money for those, because there's a high likelihood or higher likelihood that it could end up being in a situation that we don't want to happen.
So how do we determine what becomes those?
It would have to be during this process.
It works that way.
No,
That's kind of hard. Would it be a threshold of a X $1 million project? Would then be more subject not to go forward? I mean, I'm just thinking back, we were gonna build a secure residential, 16-bed secure residential back in 2008, 2009, 2010, the Waterbury complex, right behind Stanley and Lawson. Right behind it. We were ready to put a shovel in the ground. And we had a new administration and they stopped. We were ready to put a shovel on the ground, and some of us didn't support having it put in that place. And there was a new administration and they stopped it. And then we had the flood.
so basically the unknowns are so too great to be able to predict.
I think we embark on all of these projects with the best of intentions and the idea that they're gonna come to fruition. Sometimes things happen and they don't, and the money amounts to sad, and this is the same if you go into the planning office of any town, there's a shelf full of charrettes of what that town could have been that it wasn't. And so that does sometimes happen. And I think that just this whole notion of cash and pay-go is something we can't just throw a switch and do overnight. And so this seemed like a logical place to start that process of, well, this is much less tangible. When we're pouring concrete, that's definitely capital. When we're doing a planning and programming process, one could argue the other way. And I don't think either should necessarily be at the exclusion of another. It's just more trying to push us in that direction in the long term.
So jumping off of what Eric just said, what is the fundamental goal of using cash versus bond? What's the fundamental goal? Is it to get our debt service down? Is it that we manage our money that where we can, we use cash, but there are times we've got a high expenditure of something that we also need to put things on our credit card. So if the goal is really to bring down our debt service, to bring in the appropriations bill right now is at $78 million. I think $78 million is a line item for debt service. Right off the top of our general fund, they've got to put $79 million to pay off.
Interest and penalty, or
Pardon?
excuse me, interest and principal.
For 20 years. It's
Okay.
stuff we did 20 years. So is our goal to replace as much of the bonding that we can do projects that we can do with cash. Is our goal to get to 50-50? You can do 50% of your capital bill with cash and 50% bonded, and it doesn't matter if you do it for planning or site acquisition or construction. It's just, is that the goal or not?
Yeah.
Or is the goal to look at what is eligible bondable projects, of which planning is a carve out? But we saw some of the issues with our spreadsheet. Sometimes that planning goes into actual further design documents to get into site acquisition. And then it's like, well, wait a minute, we said it was only for planning, but you're now saying you can use it for site acquisition. So what's our goal?
So the point here though is, it doesn't matter whether it's planning, doesn't matter whether it's construction. If we spend money and don't have to use capital bill money, then we're reducing the future debt service, right? So it doesn't really matter which one is being used for. If we could anticipate, like the conversation we had a minute ago, where we could plan and say, well, this project's more likely to end up with, dollars expended with no physical structures even ever being built, then we might be able to target that. But if we can't target because, the reasons are unknown why all the projects will stop, I mean, why bother even thinking about it? Just spend the money when it's available to decrease the total bonded dollars that we have to have out there.
Any thoughts?
I thought from the start that it was to minimize or mitigate our debt service. That was my perception. When I first heard there was a cash fund, I thought, oh, this makes sense. We don't bond as much, and we pay some one-time projects with cash, things like that. That was my perception from the start.
Yeah, we got the sense it was about like discipline when the commissioner came in here, that 4% was, sort of forcing you to like put that aside. So
That's the formula, which we're not getting into.
right. And I kind of saw, I saw the rationale in setting something aside. I didn't like the formula either, but
Put everybody to sleep.
yeah.
So what are other thoughts in terms of what the goal of using cash versus bonding? Is that a hand, Troy?
No, I don't have much to add, I think. Yeah, no.
So what's our goal? Is the goal to try to replace or augment, try to have a balance between bonding and available cash, regardless of where that cash goes? The project. I mean, we could say that, okay, for our capital bill for this FY24, we've got 54 million bonding capacity. And on top of that, there's $8 million worth of cash. And where that 8 million goes, doesn't matter.
One other
Because we
thought,
got those projects listed.
I agree. But the other thought being, in some cases, there's more flexibility to BGS or somebody else when there's cash being used. And those kind of discussions happen here when we're talking about a project. So there might be the use of cash in certain instances where it leads to a flexibility that allows something to potentially happen that would be tied up if it was bonded dollars. And so there's two purposes now. One, as you just stated, but we might also have a purpose where we could enhance the ability of an agency to move a project forward if there was cash at a certain place in the project.
But wouldn't that all be part of committee deliberations once you take testimony? So you wouldn't want to put that in statute. I'm trying to figure out, what do you want in statute? What's the goal? What's the goal of cash when you put together a capital budget? And in the scheme of debt service and scheme of bonding in our capacity.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of it is that the goal is we're gonna save money, just like you've talked about before. If I buy this with cash, I don't pay interest on it. If it's bonded, then I'm paying for it for 20 years. And for the state, if it's possible for us to not pay bonding fees for everything, we would save money in the long run. And I mean, somebody said the other day, we could actually spend more money if we saved more money. And that makes sense. But how can we do it in the most simple way? I think that's what's the most important, honestly. I don't really care which projects we designate. Like, I'm okay with even, I think what Wayne just said about, how about we just say, here's cash fund and here's bonded, and we look at the amounts and we're like, okay, we have 8 million, we'll put 8 million in cash. We just want to make sure that we are saving money in the long run, because to my understanding, that's what the goal is.
John?
I think one thing that I find missing in the whole process is that maybe it would come from JFO is we see numbers that go out 10 years, we don't pay much attention to them. And so I'll use the women's facility as an example. I've yet to see any numbers that said that it just plain doesn't fit our plan, our bonding ability, and trying to get the debt service down a little bit. So then we go back and say, well, if we can't do that, what can we do with 35 million or something along that lines? But we don't seem to look beyond. We look extensively out 2 years, we glance at 10 years, but we don't know the 20 years.
I don't think we'd ever know 20 years in state government. 10 years is a stretch. But, I know you have, BGS is a 10-year plan of sorts.
Yeah, we all do, and I'm glad you're looking at that, because I have to say we agonize over it, looking out 10 years and seeing what's coming and trying to, you'll see that we try to stagger projects so that the burn rate is similar, but if you look at the real need, the real numbers, it's bigger than what we've got. And so, there's always that out there on the horizon. But I think you guys are collectively on the right track when you're talking about trying to move towards reducing our debt service, but it's difficult to see that in a 2-year cycle. Well, we're still borrowing as much as we can. So you don't see it now, but you do see it over 10 years. And I think grown-ups have been in here with graphs showing where this goes if the formula
Nominal
is
numbers.
in play.
General Stark's sword is gone again from the monument.
What?
General Stark's sword is off the monument, off the statue again.
What statue?
In front of the monument,
The
they
Bennington?
stole,
The Bennington?
The sword has been made off with.
they had done it a year and a half ago, and they finally got it replaced back because someone had returned it. And somehow they got it again. And they were supposed to secure it on there tight, but it's gone. They'll probably never get it back. Not that that was a big deal for all of you, but it is for
Should have
us.
put a chip in it.
Should have put what? A
Should have
chip?
put a GPS chip in it or something.
Yeah, there you go, the air tag.
A tile.
So what I'm picking up, and this is what I'm trying to get to with the language, what I'm picking up is that regardless of what it is that we fund, it is to be part of our capital budgeting process. And that it would be for eligible capital project costs.
Yes.
For eligible capital projects, period,
Yeah.
Yeah,
period.
Period.
can help it.
Regardless of planning, regardless of site acquisition, regardless of construction, it can be used for all. Is that where we are?
I think that makes more sense.
Make it smaller.
Yeah,
Well,
that makes more sense.
Then I wrote down, maybe for purpose, to minimize future debt service and provide for flexibility in project management. Is that a concept that?
Well,
Finance.
look at the creation in the language, on this. I mean, I'm not Becky. But we've created it. We've now called it the Capital Infrastructure Reserve Fund. The people, your thoughts on that language right there.
I'm looking at one that she's edited. It's just
Right.
like a-
Yes.
Right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's taken out capital expenditure cash funds. Everybody's referring it to a cash fund. And the thinking is if you rename it, and then it gives it a better definition of what it is. Capital Infrastructure Reserve Fund. That would be the new name. People okay with that?
Mhm.
To me, infrastructure reserve fund was the right amount of. Was considered then capital infrastructure. I'm not sure what that's adding.
You'll know later
Okay.
if you keep reading.
Well, I was trying to go line by line. I'm trying.
Yeah.
I'll keep with it.
This whole fund is going to be administered by the Commissioner of Financial Management in consultation with the treasurer for the purpose of using general funds to defray costs of future capital expenditures. And those expenditures would be authorized in the Capital Construction Act. That's why you have capital infrastructure. Ties it all together. Ties capital to capital. Infrastructure, you do it statewide without the word capital. The Infrastructure Reserve Fund could be used by AOT, could be used by Fish and Wildlife, could be used by Coast Guard, could be used by anybody.
Yep.
Beyond the capital.
Yes.
Then you wouldn't have much money in there for the capital. So that language ties it together.
And there's an elephant in the room with AOE or with the school bonding if that comes
I
along.
don't want, I don't want.
I know, sorry.
So then and then you go on that this capital infrastructure reserve fund is to really help with the state's general obligation bonding authority and debt service obligations. That's the creation of the fund and what it's for. It sort of tracks what we've been saying, right? And then it tells what the fund is consisted of, which is any appropriations or transfers made by the General Assembly and any interest that may be earned. That's how you get money in there. And the approach is looking at how you get money in there. It might be helpful for us to weigh in how much money should go in there on a yearly basis. Or how much of a balance to be want. Right now, there would be not quite 6 million, about 5 million left in that. Because the governor has proposed over 2 years, 19 million. And it was about 25 million. There's 19 million on up. It's like almost $6 million left in that fund. So the question is, what would be a comfortable amount? We might recommend to appropriations of that should be, knowing our needs in the future. Because some of those needs are, we know we're going to need match dollars in FY26 and 27 for our clean water and drinking water revolving loan funds. We know we're going to need a big chunk for a correctional facility. We know we're going to need a big chunk for state house expansion. We know if we want to do HVAC in our correctional facilities, it's a big chunk.
Secure juvenile.
That's right. The secure juvenile facility is a big chunk. There may be a request for a forensic unit coming somewhere. Program is in the process of being developed in the Senate. I'm not talking about where the beds are. Some of us keep asking. We don't get an answer. So those are the pressures. I got 54 million a year. So should the cash fund hold the balance of 10 million per year? balance of 15 million per year. Probst is gonna look to us for some direction here.
Yes.
I know. I feel like we're almost at a dartboard. trying to
We are.
remember.
But that's all right.
I mean, this is what we have to weigh.
Just picture it on the dartboard.
Can be mine.
But least wise, we should be in the proper order of magnitude. 10, 15 million, 10 to 20 million range.
Well, I mean, clean water, drinking water is 15 million alone for the next 2 years, for the next plan, yeah.
Yeah, we've got 14 million almost.
7.3 for FY 26, 27.
Is 20 million realistic? No.
As soon as you start putting numbers in, they
Obviously
become
not.
obsolete fairly quickly.
The thing is, you know, Brooke's gonna look at it. Give them, we negotiating here?
I mean, do we want to keep it as low as 5 million?
No, I'd say between 5 and 10.
We're gonna do it, let's go figure. 20.
Well, I said that. and-
Oh, you're 25.
and You almost, and Alice almost passed out when I said 20, so
Pressures on the capital fund.
It must have been the HVAC was.
there you go.
Well, give them a range. When you talk.
Between 15 and 20,
15 and 20. Right.
because they're going to obviously choose what they want.
Yeah, they could do a certain percentage of the general fund. I mean, that would go into this reserve fund. That's what we do for the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
There's another reserve fund. I think it's 5, it has to be 5% of your general fund budget. The amount in there has to be 5% of your general fund budget. So one thing they could do here is not have it determined that way, but they could say up to 2% of the general fund budget will be transferred to the infrastructure reserve fund, the CIR fund, CR fund or something.
You could tie that.
Sierra,
The Sierra Fund? What?
CRF fund,
Yeah.
capital reserve fund.
And would that, would about 2% give a number in that price range?
I have no idea, because you gotta do the general fund portion of your budget. I forgot how much that was.
That would require a public map.
I know, and I forgot what that was. General fund portion.
So were you saying like a percentage with a minimum appropriation annually?
Yeah, up to,
Oh,
Sure.
maximum appropriation.
yeah,
Percentage was maximum.
because your general fund is gonna be in deficit some years.
Oh, yeah.
And you could still in any 1 year spend it down to zero, but the fund would exist and be replenished the following year if you,
Do we want,
oh, I don't, that's.
I don't know. So we'll talk with Becky, we can have Ben, we can have Dan in here and all of that. And then the use of funds. What we basically said, the use of funds would be, should you come into Ways and Means?
I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
Diane Lampier came in here to talk about Ways and Means bill to Hayden and said, well, I want to let them know we've dropped this from this bill. So he emailed me on the floor and I go, we don't have this bill. Sorry about it. It was a sports betting bill. I
Let's see, wrong
where
room.
are the things? Then I wrote back to him, she probably thought she was telling Ways and Means Committee. Anyway, so what we basically said that the use of the funds would be used for eligible capital projects that are within. And what she has also done is on page 2, on line 5, I think this is what she has done. That there would be recommendations for which of those projects we would use cash for. So it's the project recommendation and approval, and she's laid out the plan, the process that this would be. Any plans for this fund would be submitted to us as part of the governor's capital budget request. So when the governor presents his capital budget, the budget would have to indicate which projects would be funded by cash. And we would review this and then make recommendations. And the expenditures from the fund would only be made by an appropriation by the general assembly. And then all fund balances would carry forward. Then this is where I got a little dicey, about the 2-year thing. And that what she was thinking was, that they would have no more than 2 years to encumber those dollars. That's the thing. And if they don't encumber those dollars would then be freed up for other projects. Those dollars still stay in that reserve fund, but they could go to another project. It's another type of reallocation.
Simply, they wouldn't be authorized to spend them if it was beyond that, but they'd have to come back here. But
No, if it's encumbered.
I don't know if it's encumbered, right, but if it was unencumbered,
It's unencumbered, it's like you have another
Repo.
repo column.
you could,
This section.
they'd have to come back here anyway and explain why the project wasn't going forward.
Right,
And we'd have another opportunity to reauthorize that.
right. That's the thing, I think. Eric?
I think the more we treat the process of appropriating and clawing back and where it goes, the more it rhymes with what we do in capital, the less chance there will be to screw things up. You know, so does that make sense?
Just keep it as separate as possible.
Well, separate as possible, but also like I feel for the accounting clerk who's like, wait, is this capital or cash? Okay,
Right.
do I move that 2 degrees to the right or 2 degrees to the left? Like, we want to set ourselves up for success with process. So the more like the capital process, even if there are different limitations
Right.
on the life cycle of it, as long as the direction is similar, then it'll work better.
And that's what this is have it similar to our reallocation process.
May I ask a question?
Yep, and then Troy.
Would, like capital funds in this 2-year cycle, would the commissioner or other agencies be able to move things within their section? If you had 2 planning projects going and one was, right now we can move stuff in section 2. We can move capital dollars.
Could you move cash?
Could we
dollars?
move cash? Is there a contamination problem? I don't see one immediately, but. Is there a
Ask
reason?
Becky, I don't know.
Is there a reason we couldn't?
So along those lines, I'm wondering if there's, and I don't know the answer. This is not me suggesting this. I just want to ask the question. Is there any benefit to aligning those time spans between capital and cash to, 1, avoid that confusion, and 2, to kind of clean up some of the, because we're going back, we're reclaiming money back as far back as 2011, I want to say. So do we make it 5 years for both? Do we make it,
We'll keep it 2.
so you want to go to 2 years on
Yeah.
capital as well?
Yeah.
Got to be
Yes.
encumbered?
Hmm?
It's got to
What
be
we-
encumbered within 2 years on capital as well?
What we do right now,
Is that, well, in practice, that's not the case, based on what
Based on
Repro's
what
been
you're
doing.
saying?
Yeah,
Eric,
I thought the language said 5 for capital and 2 for cash.
is it 5? I didn't think it was 5 years.
So maybe we'll get to that point.
For-
well, should they be aligned? I guess that's my question. should they be identified?
But for the capital, the repro group, you're looking at money that's older than 2 years.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But you're looking, it's the 2-year bar. you know.
Starting at 2 years.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that it was done in such a short time frame like that was because there were some departments and entities that were banking on additional,
Right,
it was
yeah.
A&R. They had millions.
Yeah.
That they were waiting, that they were accumulating. And it all played into the cycle of when you could match those federal dollars. And they wanted to make sure they had the state match and they were accumulating it.
There's a couple of little agencies that are doing that.
And that's why we had only 2 years that, yeah, you got it for 2 years, but you got to really, in those 2 years, where are you in that project? And if you haven't expended any of it, you've had the money for 2 years, what's
Should
going
be-
on?
It should be income.
What's going on? So Eric,
We don't bank, but we bank. We don't find future legislatures, but we do.
Yes, yes, we do.
It has been my experience so far, and I look at a scenario like the Women's Correctional Facility where we know that's probably a 5-year project. And there's money in this bill that may not get expended until year 3. And it's
but
in
we
this
know
2
that's
years.
an ongoing project.
Right,
There are some projects here that
Yeah.
are not ongoing. And it was a line item 2 years ago in a capital bill. And they look at the balance that's in that fund and
Absolutely.
only the bonding cost was taken out. It's like, wait a minute, you've had this for, you're on your third year here.
absolutely.
And what's going on here? But if you've got a big project, like a correctional facility or secure residential, they're not gonna get those dollars out in 2 years. We know that, but we still have money that we're putting towards it.
Right.
So
I
That's
just want-
wise when the
I
price
just want to
tag
be
is.
careful that we don't set up a trigger that's gonna interrupt. You know, I mean, with one of those big projects, maybe 5 years is a healthier window. It doesn't mean repo can't come back every darn year and say, well, what's the deal? But to not have something lock up or sunset midstream because of a time limit constraint. I mean, I think we kind of addressed that with encumbered. Maybe if they're encumbered.
they're
fine.
encumbered, they're encumbered.
Spend.
And I don't think I'd worry about it.
Okay.
So then, in section 2, talks about the process in terms of how our bonding capacity is established, which is through the debt affordability. And if you go to the top of whatever page it is, little C, on or before September 30th of every year, the committee is going to submit to the governor and us the estimated amount that we can bond for. And the committee estimate, this is a linkage, this is new language. This we got in the throes of a problem this past September. The committee estimate shall not take into consideration the balance in the reserve fund. And the intent of that is you don't decrease your bonding capacity by the amount of money that you have in the reserve fund. What happened this last time? That's the intent. And then section 3 deals with, I don't know what that deals with. That deals with our bill and how it's structured. It's just saying that recommendations for capital projects may be paid for from the infrastructure reserve fund that has been established. So this is your reallocation number 2, lines 14 through 16. Notwithstanding subdivision 1.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
Rather than that little number 2 cover everything.
so I think that's a policy decision that we need to have when Becky and Dan are in the room to really think this through.
5 years.
And one thing with Becky.
Because right now, as the number 2 states, it would be, anything coming out of capital bill would be 5 years, and we'd be looking at it, so we wouldn't even have to specify that between the bonded money and the cash money, it would just stand as 5 years, unless you wanted to change it to 2 or something.
Is that one?
It's another flag. Did it fly over the State House today?
No, it's not allowed.
Sadly, David Sheets had some bad news on that front.
I didn't think So we gotta, I just think we gotta flag this, because what we've got is the 2-year thing, and then we have the 2-year thing for your bonded, and then you got the 5-year thing. And this is something we're gonna flag and talk to Becky on, and Dan.
Yeah, like it was like I'm actually like
And then, yeah, let's report to us. This is again looking into your timeline for spending. And then in 2 on the last page. So, this is all talking about really your repro. So I flagged this and we just talked about it. with Becky and Ben. So the real gist, the real change that we made is that there are 2 things. Called Capital Infrastructure Reserve Fund, and it can be used for all eligible projects within your capital construction, state capital construction. Right? So if this passes, then we're not limited to whether it's planning, design, site acquisition, or construction.
Cleans it up.
So we can make some changes if we want when we get the new spreadsheet. Some things might become a little clearer or may not matter. But it may matter in terms of the line item and how you explain it on the spreadsheet. And you'll see that once you get the next spreadsheet, you start working with Jan, you start working with Becky. Okay?
Yeah, I think it's right to do it with them.
So I can connect with Becky about that over the weekend and Monday. See if we can get a new draft on this for next week. And then go from there. So one more thing before we split for the weekend. One more thing, Tristan and Eric, it's yours. We're gonna be talking, we've shifted gears, Justice Reinvestment 2. And their conversation with Trevor Squirrel, who does the DOC budget for appropriations. That's you two.
Bud?
I think the summary from Representative Squirrel from appropriations, a couple of things he wanted to flag for corrections and institutions are that there was proposed there's $1 million in Justice Reinvestment 2 that DOC had a proposal for spending on the planning management system, I believe it is, that Probst felt was not exactly on target the intent of that fund.
What did you say they were wanting to spend it on?
Some updates to the offender management system.
That's all right.
The software.
Yeah.
They've already got some money from Justice Reinvestment to start doing some initial.
So Probst pulled that out and asked us if we want to have any input on that $1 million in JR2 before it goes to the Senate. The Senate, of course, can handle it, or the money's not going anywhere. So we don't have to take action, but it's been flagged for the committee. That's one item. Any questions or anything to add?
And the purpose of that would be to reduce recidivism rates.
JR2 is, it's really kind of taking this beds, the savings from the out-of-state beds that's not spent, and then reinvest that in
To resources to assist
Community-based
individuals
services.
returning into.
with a focus on kind of one-time special fund, special projects that reduce the burden on the whole system. So they felt that this project proposed by DOC, while we appreciate DOC putting forward that proposal, was not the idea, but was not targeted.
So Justice Reinvestment too, when we worked with Council of State Governments for the last 3 years, I think it was, and we had David Moore. Oh, boy. It's just when we need, this is when we needed, you can sit and join. We're doing corrections, but I might give you a breather.
No, perfect.
When David Demore was testifying on YouTube for us or Zoom, just to give you the background on Justice Reinvestment, was really looking at the pressures within corrections, what was going on, and where we could possibly save money. And when you save that money, it's still in DOC's budget, and then you reinvest it into those programs that are targeted to keep people from the revolving door. So one thing that really came to light when, I guess we got new language. We have new language?
No, I just was checking in if you still needed me, because I haven't heard anything.
No, I haven't heard, because Becky's got to work with Katie.
Okay.
So we'll probably have language on Tuesday. So the thing that really came to highlight in Justice Reinvestment too, with the Council of State Governments was, and all of these folks were at the table, was across, it wasn't just DOC, it was Agency of Human Services, all the departments, it was the Defender General, it was state's attorneys, it was the courts, it was the legislative branch, it was the executive branch, I mean, every gamut, there were advocates there. And what really came to light is partners out there within the Agency of Human Services and with other entities as well, we're not coming up to plate to provide services to folks who are reentering from incarcerated facilities. They don't want anything to do with someone who had been incarcerated. That came through pretty clearly with mental health, designated agencies, entities that were working with family members of the folks who are incarcerated but not going to work with the incarcerated person. So they say, you've got to beef those up, because right now it's all on DOC's dollars and DOC staff to do this. So we've been putting money in over from those savings. We've been putting money into domestic violence programs for helping folks who have been convicted of domestic violence. We've been putting money into Department of Mental Health. We put in $400,000 a few years ago in Department of Mental Health specifically for this. We've put money in a little bit for our community justice centers. We've put some money in for transitional housing to expand that beyond just DOC providing transitional housing or changing the model of that. And the other thing that Justice Reinvestment, the Council of State Governments also said that is a big, heavy lift to really figure out how successful these programs are being and how successful DOC is being. It is really hard to get their data because their IT system is so integrated. And that we really need to invest in their data collections, because that's really hindering some of the information that's really needed so that you can go forward and make good decisions. So those are just kind of the things. So Wayne?
So the OMS system, where was that? That's not in our capital money. That's that JR2 money, right? So what was the discussion? Obviously, that system needs to be fixed. So where's the appropriate place for the money to come from?
It's general funds, not us.
It's them, not us.
So what we did off session, because there was language that the Justice Oversight Committee put in. We put in more money to the network, put in more money for the network for domestic violence, because one thing that we did last year, and I think Mary and Michelle will remember this, we waived the fees when a person was reentering and part of their conditions of release is to participate in a harm reduction program, being domestic violence reduction. The offender had to pay a fee, and that was deterring a lot of folks from participating. So we put money in to pay for that fee, and then what came to light was it wasn't quite enough money, because there was more people starting to come in. So we added more money to that.
Do you remember how much?
It started out around 400.
Yes.
Wow. And that wasn't enough.
Yeah, so that's how we've kind of targeted
Who
it.
collects those fees?
It's the network. It's the network that provides the program.
The program is current risk reduction program in the DV is contracted out.
But you have to pay a fee to get in there. So the money was appropriated to the network. And then,
We're still paying a fee.
and we're picking it up instead of, we're picking it up. So the offenders, so that the offender can get in there, so they were finding people who aren't participating, so they can't afford the fee. So we waive if the offender pay it, we pay.
So if I recall correctly, the justice reinvestment money is supposed to be one-time funds. So you don't want to start a program and have a salary that you can't continue to fund, right?
Well, we kind of. This is
Well, I mean-
where it gets real complicated, because last year we did the work where some of this money should be base funding. Because you want to build up your justice reinvestment initiatives and not just do a one-year shot and build up the base. DOC wants these out-of-state bed savings to go to just one time.
So why don't we say we have $1 million, we want this to be used for reentry funds in communities, and give us an RFP. Maybe somebody's going to build a reentry residential program for people in recovery, and then we have the infrastructure for it.
I did that and I got yanked.
What?
I did
I
that.
don't think that will work with. I don't think that's really work with the
Seems like a
intent of those
real
dollars.
Kind of capital, long-term
Yeah.
capital thing. Madam Chair, can I add a second topic from approach that it's kind of holding off on, but it starts to become relevant here? There is an issue with the kind of future JR2 funding kind of not having a source, you know?
Yeah, because you're out of state bed savings, so not much.
Right, so this $1 million is basically.
Well, you're never gonna get $1 million again.
Yeah, this is it as far as if for this to continue any past this point, it's just gonna have to reach a discussion of finding a basis for that. Did I sum that up? Okay, Eric, from Representative Squirrel.
Yeah. Well, with $1 million, I would inject it into your continuing, which I already injected into the community justice centers, the restorative justice centers, the transitional housing providers to help them strengthen the programs that they still already have. It would help the restorative justice centers get the reparative panels back into place and the reentry panels back into place. All the stuff that is written in legislation that is currently no longer being practiced. It gives that opportunity to get these things back into place.
For 1 year,
Well,
Yeah.
for 1 year.
I want to keep in mind too, the folks who are currently detained, especially due to lack of housing, right? So if it's a condition of release, or if they've served their sentence, but a condition of parole release is that they have to be housed and they don't have housing. And that's, I want to separate that from transitional housing, just this general boosting of transitional housing, but it's their funding similar to, if you can't pay a fee, we'll pay it. If you can't pay a rent, right? But again, $1 million probably isn't going to go very far, but I am worried about the number of people we keep in incarcerated just because they don't have housing. And I
And
think
those
that's,
would be people that have reached their min, and then,
yeah, right.
and I don't know what that number, at one time.
Or because they're kicked out of housing for housing rules rather
Yeah, and
than.
we address, one thing I want to do, once we get through the capital bill, once we get through the craziness on the floor and all that. I was thinking about this over the week. We put in an awful lot of initiatives. This brings to mind one that we did. We put in an awful lot of initiatives over the last 20 years in terms of looking at our corrections population and who's being held, who's coming in, blah, blah, blah. And we've done a lot. And I thought it might be good for the committee to hear about some of those things that we've done, to realize that a lot of folks that used to come in through our doors back in 2005, 2006, 2007, they're not coming through our doors. They're not coming through our doors. The ones that are coming through our doors are the toughest cases. And that's what the goal was to keep those hard beds for hard cases, not people coming in with misdemeanors and DUIs. And one of the initiatives that we put in statute is if a person is in a transitional housing situation and they violated the conditions of that house, they are not in violation of their conditions of release.
Okay.
We put that in place. So we've put in a lot of tools that you folks, because you're new, have not seen the continuum of that over the past 20 years. And I was thinking it'd be really helpful for us as a committee to hear about this. We have pretrial services to keep people from being their charged at arraignment, but get them into services that hopefully when they do go back before the judge can say, hey, I'm only putting you on 2-year probation. We did not have term limits on probation. We had people on probation for 20 years.
Further order of the court.
And we said, you're not gonna be on probation longer than 2 years, except blah, blah, blah. And then we also put in place, we're gonna have a midpoint review of your probation. 1 year into it to see how you're doing. And maybe if you're doing fine, poof. The longer you keep somebody under the custody of corrections, the more problems you're gonna have. And the lower the risk of reoffending and the lower the risk of severity of crime, and you keep them in the corrections system long, you're creating a criminal. So we've put in so many initiatives that, we put in presumptive parole. So right now, I don't know where we are in terms of which crimes would be eligible because we're slowly rolling this out. But right now, when you reach your minimum, for certain crimes, it's not your listed crimes or your big 12. You are presumed to be paroled. And the reason for that is you're going to have more freedom out there to go across state lines, to hold a job, to visit family. And it's the parole board that's going to be setting the conditions, not corrections. And for some reason, if you can't be paroled, DOC will submit why. You might be able to be furloughed. So we put in those little techniques. And investment is a piece of that as well. And then the rub comes, like what Tristan was saying, for the savings.
Yeah.
The rub comes because DOC will, and when we went through their general fund budget, they will propose an X $million amount for X number of beds in Mississippi. They'll say, we're funding 150 beds. And that's what it will be for that fiscal year. They'll fund 150 beds. At the end of the fiscal year, maybe we only used 100 of those 150 beds. So you get a bed savings there that can be allocated to justice from investment. So we're shrinking the number of beds that we're using out of state Mississippi. So they're not going to come in here with a budget to the general fund for 500 beds. They're going to come in for a budget request that reflects the small number of beds that are actually using. So the bed savings aren't going to be that big. We had 1.9 million at the end of the FY22 budget. I mean, usually it's about 300,000 at the most. So this is not. So the question is, what do we do with that remaining million?
Infuse the justice centers and other programs, even it might only be 1 year. But what I'm hearing is what, on a pilot program and then toss it aside after the million. Hey, a lot of agencies can continue to enhance the good programs that they're doing. A lot of, like what the Turning Point centers do, are not being funded. A lot of even the reentry panels or restorative panels that are being conducted by the CJCs or the restorative programs are significantly underfunded. It gives an opportunity to inject some money that provides a valued service to individuals coming back into the community. The second piece is to somehow figure out somewhere along the line, when are they going to develop a reentry strategy, a reentry philosophy. That's what justice reinvestment all across this country, infused in any state that utilize those resources. The third piece, and it's also the missing piece a lot of times, infusing also in assisting with victim services. Lost individual who is subject to crimes and the things that take place that at times we forget about. There's a victim involved in all of this. What level of resources and assistance to help them with the trauma that they've incurred to get back also on track. Victim services is also a big piece of this.
Look at their testimony on that. I think it's something we haven't heard a lot this year in the
Just
community.
do good time. Just do earn good time. We'll hear all about it. Remember that, Mary? We put in a good time. We put back in earn good time. And we heard a lot from different community. Not that one.
I think,
Did you have your hand up? Tom?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, even with the one-time nature of it, I think I do favor that approach. It's, we're asking CJCs to do a bit more now with the sexual violence cases, so it might be good for them in the transition anyways. It seems like they're hurting a bit. I can't think of anything better to do with money, frankly, for this.
That's what we did last year. We did some.
I think if we're going to look at the biggest failure that we have is follow up on what Troy said. We can't find housing for people to transition out of corrections on, and it is a huge failure, and it has contributed hugely to the recidivism rate and people just lingering in jail with no need to be there. I mean, it just, and of course, sexual cases, sex cases are the most difficult. The Department of Corrections takes the position, if you can climb on the roof of a building and see a school 5 miles away, you can't live there. And whether it's right or wrong, I'm not commenting on, but I mean, it's just really difficult to place people who have been through programming, who present according to DOC instruments of minimal risk, are still lingering in jail as a result of not being able to obtain housing. And if we're going to, I don't even know if putting money there will help, because there is no housing available.
Is there anyone how's DOC doing on, I know they kickstaffed on supporting that?
Supporting what part?
Reentry housing.
And that's one thing that the Council of State Governments is saying, it's all on DOC. Should be spread out to the partners.
For a period of time, community action agencies were helping out, and they were contributing housing units for them.
Pathways does a lot of work with,
Beg pardon?
Pathways does a lot of work with people coming out of incarceration.
Mecca was doing it up in the Northeast Kingdom Community Action. So, I mean, they were partners, but again, I think just housing units just run out.
Well, some of that was a decision on the back end when the area change and to go to more a scattered site housing model, which, as they expressed, the research shows, no, the research shows that it's the most cost reducing unilaterally and collaterally, which removed a significant amount of your therapeutic community beds, which you're well aware of. And the main model that is practiced is the scattered site. So yeah, Pathways does a wonderful, wonderful job, but that only fits the needs of the individuals that need that level of care, which is not as many as we believe.
Some of that came from recommendations from the Council of State Governments on the Justice Reforms. That's where that came from. So he's putting that out on the table as to why those decisions were made, just because of the work that Council of State Governments did in the previous 4 years. Yeah. So it's a quandary. I mean, maybe we want to be silent on it because maybe we need more information. Maybe I can dig up the work from what we did before last year, because we divided it up between the network, the justice centers, community justice centers.
The network got money for two purposes. One of them was to get rid of the fees. The other was to develop curriculum around same-sex partner
Right,
violence.
but they were also doing the domestic violence.
Right, both those things.
So just be thinking, I don't know, maybe there does need to be IT or you going to Ways and Means?
Yep.
Good luck.
I don't think it'll be long.
Let's hope not. I'd like to know what they say.
Just come back in, Troy. That's door there says Ways and Means.
I mean, the CJCs are doing really effective work in reentries. I mean, like when I was a reentry coordinator in Brattleboro, we had usually 10 COSAs going at a time. And a lot of the other CJCs in the state maybe had like 4, 5, 6. And partly it was a staffing issue. You know, it was like, who can you get trained? Who can you, how can you process? And, you know, I'd be a little hesitant to put a bunch of money in and then create positions that aren't going to be able to fund it very long. But honestly, $1 million, like you could fund positions for 3 or 4 years at multiple centers. You know, we didn't get paid that much as reentry coordinators. And if you were able to increase office space and then hire extra reentry coordinators, you could serve a lot of people in ways that are both super effective and also not really that expensive, relatively speaking.
That's not happening all over the state. I mean, our COSA person has met with me a number of times.
Yep.
Tell me that they can't get,
Volunteers.
yeah, they can't get, well, they can't get clients. They can't get, they're not getting people.
Referrals aren't coming through.
Yeah.
Well, the things are plugged up in the prison right now because so many people are behind. But
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
They have no chance to find volunteers to participate,
Yes,
providing the process.
yes. Well, this is the woman who I've known her a long time since she was a young person, and she's trying really hard.
Well, we're talking about two different, the clients coming in,
Right.
but also you need those volunteers
Yes.
from your community that are willing to participate in COSA,
Right.
be part of the COSA
Right. Okay,
provided
yeah, yeah,
system.
yeah.
And you can't find them because they're there and then they burn out.
It is difficult.
So we're gonna finish up here. Let's think about this. Maybe the best thing to do is just let approach, make their decision.
I think we should recommend. They don't
To
feel
clarify,
bad.
I think Approach was gonna leave it on the table, but the Senate would have more time to take it up after crossover. So if we don't, it's kind of it's very tight for us to get something, and they wanted to alert us, but we don't have to take action for the Senate to produce it.
Anything else before we finish up? I hope we're in decent shape for the capital bill. We went through the reserve fund and what we decided, Dan, just goes to eligible capital projects in the capital. We take out all the planning, language about planning, design,
Good
and
move.
have it really go almost to our bottom line.
Yeah, good move.
And then we kept it tied to CDAC, we kept it tied to the governor making a recommendation in the capital bill, how much would be cash. The one thing we flagged is, do you track how long cash project that is funded by cash can be out there before the cash gets reallocated? Is it 2 years? Is it 5 years?
Dan Dickerson, Drake Fiscal. I gave that a little bit of thought after yesterday. And, I mean, I think before I'd been leaning towards just having a limit to when the spending authority would, or having a time when the spending authority would expire. But I think you could probably insert similar language to the existing capital appropriations about, after so many years, you could either say funds may be reallocated, or you could say the funds shall be reallocated, sort of like what Becky had set up. So that way, I mean, I think if, that becomes more of a messaging. If you say shall be reallocated, then an administration can go, okay, we're going to reallocate these funds, or, the people that come in to testify can make an argument for why they need to retain. So that way it's not just something that sort of is below the surface that the repo committee tries to deal with.
But should we have the same years for the cash as we do the bonding? That's really the question as well. It should be a shall.
I think,
What's the time frame?
I think 5 years in shall is probably, or at least you can put that on paper, and maybe approach will feel differently, but I still feel like 5 years is a long time for general funds. But given that there's probably going to be a lot of projects that use a mix of both, then it's probably best to keep those aligned.
Yeah, that's what we're getting to. So that's the thing we want to talk to Becky, but I'll circle back to Becky just to say, and go to the project, doesn't matter what part of the project, planning, construction, site acquisition, whatever. Not delineate, take that out. Rename it, connect it to the debt affordability, really what they can look at. And we have to determine, do we want a floor amount in that reserve? We want a certain amount to always be there, 5 to 10 million, 10 to 15, 15 to 20 million, knowing of our out year pressures. We're either 5 to 10 or 15 to 20. We don't know. It's a flag.
Well, given that you're going to end, I mean, unless approach puts more money in this year, you're going to end next year with around 5 million. I would say the floor should probably be 5 million. Now, and if the fund grows at some point, if the fund grows going forward, then you could explore upping that, but maybe starting with 5 million for now.
Yeah, but we won't be able to pull that 5 million out. So you keep it as the floor. Or do you zero out fund? Would we be allowed to zero out that fund and then repopulate? Or do you have to keep a certain amount in there?
Approach might not want to have a floor. I think they're trying not to pull
Whole money?
whatever's left, but given the pressure they're under, they very well could. So it might be, I know it won't be great for the capital bill,
But they could pull that 5 million.
but if they have, I think they're going to want at least the flexibility if they need to.
So no cash is sitting anywhere, no matter how you name this
I
thing.
can spend it.
Just as long as members don't realize this is a goal.
Good point.
Can you imagine if our
Then it's a
colleagues knew
show.
there was $5 million?
And it's a feeding
Cash
frenzy in the
fund
short,
that would be spent 20 times over.
it'd be a feeding frenzy in the Shark Tank.
So that's where we are, Ben, and that before we close up for the week. Okay? I mean, Dan, why did I call you Ben? We had Ben yesterday, and you don't even look like that.
He doesn't.
So,
Friday.
yeah, I guess, so I was in a discussion with the chair of appropriations and a few of the JFO folks working on the budget. There are probably a couple of things that I'll just approach you about after this, but I think a couple of things that you all might want to consider in crafting the bill is I think that the appropriations committee, as far as the cash fund, because they're only doing a 1-year operating budget, they're only going to appropriate 1 year of cash fund expenditures.
That 8 million. Or
So,
nine.
so the question for you is whether you authorize 2 years of cash fund projects, or whether you just align with the big bill and authorize the 1 year and just leave the second year aside for now.
Can we authorize that cash for FY25?
I think you could.
But
You're
they
just
could-
not gonna get any spending authority. You're just gonna have language out there that says whenever this money is appropriated, you can use it for this purpose. So I don't think there's any harm in doing 2 years of authorizations, but I will just say that the big bill is most likely only going to appropriate 1 year of cash fund.
But when we go up to approach, we're doing a 2-year bonding. So we're authorizing the bonds, the capacity of the bonds for those 2 years. And these are the projects we're saying. But definitely in FY24, you can start expending that
Yes,
bonding.
even,
But you can't in FY20, you can't, in FY24, BGS won't be able to spend any money that's put out there for a project in FY25, right?
right, you are creating appropriations for FY25, but those aren't effective until FY25.
So that would be the same thing for the cash fund.
Yeah, except
Except-
they're just not gonna make the appropriation yet of cash fund dollars.
So we would not be guaranteed that 10 million in FY25, basically.
You're not
Because
guaranteed
they
that,
would
but
say
look,
there's only 15 million left in the cash fund, not the 5, because we're including 10 of that in our 2-year capital budget.
I don't think appropriations is gonna touch what you have set aside for 25, but they're also not going to appropriate it. So I think that money would be safe. Of course, the governor's budget's gonna come, the adjustment's gonna come back and probably change that. But I think if you at least have, if you send a bill over there with authorizations for 2 years, then at least appropriations knows that if they're gonna take money out of the cash fund, they should not take out what you have set aside for 25.
Set aside. May protect it more by doing it that way. Okay. Anything else before we lose any more committee members? Got a long week. So we're back on Tuesday. Tuesday's gonna be a long day. Did they say anything about hours about time frame on the floor? I think we're still on the floor Wednesday and Thursday afternoons at 1.
I think so.
We would have chunks of time on Wednesday and Thursday mornings for prep. Tuesday, I want to meet. And hopefully Becky might be, I would assume Becky would have the bill on draft form at that point, and that's where we really need to start. And repro, when do you think you're gonna give us the final number next week?
We were thinking of one more meeting, we should be able to wrap it up. Yeah, that's what
So
we're.
that-
I can try to convene us Tuesday morning before
Okay.
you guys meet in this room.
Now, let's hope we don't have some
Yeah,
on Tuesday.
8:30
yeah.
How about between 8:30
or
and
9 o'clock. Well,
She's
it's,
got a
yeah,
long drive.
the floor is at 10. How about 9? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Mary's
Where's
got
Uncle
a
Tim?
long-
Mary's 9, okay with you?
Mary has a 3-hour drive.
Yeah.
Well, it's about 2 hours and 15 minutes if there's not.
Yeah, but by the time you get out. and all
Yeah, they don't
that-
call you Leadfoot for
Oh,
nothing.
no, I'm.
Does. She's behind me going up and over the mountain. I was getting scared. What are you doing?
I had Senate 3 pass me in a 40-mile-an-hour zone coming down through Woodbury, going about 60.
Who's Senate, right?
I'm not saying.
It's not bad.
No, he's 2,
These two.
and he's got a Lincoln. This was a Jeep. I was like, whoa, dude.
I'm glad the bolts on my license plate are too rusted for me to put my new
Are we
plates on.
still on?
So I think we're done before we get on YouTube.